Hello Zero Books readers and viewers, it's me again, Douglas Lane, and in this video I'll be returning once again to the Jordan Peterson phenomenon. The doctor has another 12 rules for life on the market and is making the rounds again. While it's good to know that he's on the mend and feeling better, his return to the world of podcasting and book promotion fills me with dread. Not because Peterson is such a terrible figure, but because I worry that we're stuck ideologically and that his return might coincide with a repetition of the sort of left political mistakes that help him seem relevant. Will he be able to use the liberal establishment to gain notoriety a second time? This is a question I hope to fully articulate in the video. Along the way, I'll examine some ideas from our upcoming book, The End of History, in order to shed light on the current political dynamic that seems to be holding us in stasis, perhaps forever. The sixth rule in Peterson's new book, 12 More Rules for Life, is this: abandon ideology. To set up the necessity for this rule, Peterson begins by referring to Friedrich Nietzsche and his announcement that God was dead. According to Peterson, Nietzsche was a critic of rationalist ideologies. Nietzsche mourned how Judeo-Christian values, the values that had once secured the harmonious working out of social life, had come under the casual scrutiny of irresponsible philosophers. To put it in the lingo of contemporary critical theory, the imaginary of the West had been captured, pinned, and put under the microscope of reason. And as a result, the essence and spirit of civilization had been snuffed out. The first thing to note about this explication of Nietzsche's announcement is that Peterson skips over the fact that Nietzsche thought that the God-killing nihilism that he prophesied was a product of the Judeo-Christian value system itself. Nietzsche was a critic of Christianity, a critic of Western civilization, and a critic of the path that civilization had taken historically. The late philosopher Rick Roderick once explained how Christianity was responsible for modern nihilism this way.
Well, the two things that he says, and again, keep that passage in mind, that characterize Christianity are resentment, and the term there means this double move of love-hate, the resentment of the weak of the strong, but the resentment plays itself out for the strong as well in the form of guilt. Now, Nietzsche takes this whole argument to be very destructive of all ethical theories in the Western tradition for this obvious reason, that whether you're talking about Mill or about Kant, clearly these theories are rooted in that tradition.
To put it in a different way, the world didn't become uncertain after Christianity was questioned, but rather the religious world unraveled due to its own internal contradictions. Another prime example of where Peterson goes wrong can be found in his descriptions of utopian ideology. He delivers this description through a summary of the achievements of the Russian philosopher and novelist Dostoyevsky. Dostoyevsky could see that the adoption of a rigid, comprehensive utopian ideology predicated on a few apparently self-evident axioms presented a political and spiritual danger with the potential to far exceed in brutality all that had occurred in the religious, monarchical, or even pagan past. Dostoyevsky, like Nietzsche, foresaw that all of this was coming almost 50 years before the Leninist revolution in Russia. Now, while it's true that Dostoyevsky is often read as a prophet, and he was undoubtedly a great artist, what Peterson leaves out is how Dostoyevsky was informed by the past, by the French Revolution, for instance, or by the Enlightenment, as much as he was prognosticating about the future. What Peterson leaves out is the fact that both his own and Dostoyevsky's projects were made possible by the material and ideological changes that emerged through the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and the bourgeois revolutions that swept through Europe in the 19th century. In fact, even the Judeo-Christian tradition that Peterson wants to return to emerged from these same historical changes. The term itself became widely popular after World War II, and according to Arthur Cohen, writing for Commentary magazine in 1969, gained traction in order to cover up or overcome the long-standing conflict between Christians and Jews in the wake of the Holocaust. It was only after World War II that the myth of a Judeo-Christian tradition truly took hold. After the Holocaust, and when faced with the triple threat of automation, overpopulation, and nuclear warfare, the idea that there was some common Judeo-Christian culture to cling to was a seemingly necessary palliative. When Peterson refers to this tradition, he is in fact referring to a contradictory synthesis of some aspects of the Enlightenment, like property rights, individualism, the importance of free speech and free expression, and aspects of the traditional communal values of the counter-Enlightenment forces of the 19th century. In fact, what Peterson is advocating for is, by some definitions, an ideology. It's worth noting that the word ideology can have a number of different meanings. Sometimes it's used as a pejorative, and it denotes a set of beliefs that are clung to dogmatically, beliefs that are consciously or unconsciously justifying social, political, or economic practices, beliefs that attempt to paper over contradictions in society and thought both. And the neutral way to use the term is as a signifier for any set of beliefs or ideas that explicate the meaning of reality. Ideological notions are perhaps most powerful when they are taken to be natural facts, be beyond reason, or to be sacred. They are weakest when they're a set of principles or arguments that are at least thought to be comprehensible and coherent. Marxism became ideological in the worst sense when it became mystified, fluid, and incomprehensible. For instance, given that Marx argued that the state form had to be overcome before socialism could be achieved, Stalin's notion of state socialism was pure ideology. Today's neoliberalism can likewise be seen to be ideological to the extent that it is used to justify state spending on private enterprises, even as it claims to be about protecting the freedom of the market. And the idea that there is a Judeo-Christian tradition to return to is likewise ideological, as it papers over the contradiction between socially conservative values based on religions and the liberal values that spring from the Enlightenment in bourgeois society. When people describe Jordan Peterson and his ideas, when they attempt to explain his appeal, they frequently cite how he is offering especially young men a way to have dignity in a world that often denies them this opportunity. And I think this is true enough. But I think he has also emerged for some of the same reasons that Trump and Sanders emerged. Namely, he is another figure of nostalgia. The notion of a Judeo-Christian civilization that created conditions that allowed citizens to create lives worth living was short-lived. It was dominant from around 1945 to around 1964. Associated with the Cold War, it didn't really last as long as the conflict, but was picked apart in the era known as the 60s. By 1980, it had been replaced by a variety of other ideologies, by a multi-ideological nexus maybe. There are various words for this nexus. Sometimes it's called postmodernism, sometimes multiculturalism, sometimes Reaganism or Thatcherism. In fact, all of these might just be aspects of the totality of relations, which, for the sake of convenience, I'll call neoliberalism. The reason Peterson is so popular, the reason his attempt to return to the Judeo-Christian ideology of the mid-20th century was the hotness for a while, and might be again, is because, as the gang from the Alpha Bunga Bunga podcast note in their upcoming book, The End of History, neoliberalism as an ideology is breaking down. In a chapter entitled Ideologies of the Near Future, the Bunga Bunga gang provide a table of today's ideologies. There is a center-right, state-capitalist, post-neoliberal, conservative, corporatist ideology, the center-left, progressive, technocratic ideology, and the far-right, authoritarian, populist ideology. And they say, at the moment, the center-left, progressive, technocratic ideology is in danger of being absorbed by the center-right, state-capitalist one. These progressive technocrats represent the woke faction of capital. and their class interests. The Bunga Gang described them as PMC, or of the professional managerial class, leads them to have sympathy for the existing institutions and prevents them from seeking political rupture. The technocrats also don't have any independent ideological orientation. What's missing from the left, the center-left progressive technocrats, is a belief in the ability of individuals to change their circumstances, and even more importantly, a belief in the working class as a class that can organize and act rather than be acted upon. For all Peterson's faults, a belief in individual responsibility and independence is something he and others who are pushing for this return to the Cold War Judeo-Christian ideology can offer, if only in an apolitical guise. So Peterson is back, and despite his sixth rule, he is selling an ideology that serves the center and the far right. If we're going to get beyond Peterson, we'll need to be both conscious of the ideologies we can't avoid operating within, and be able to develop a project for a new ideology that encourages both proletarian action and self-awareness.
Well, you can really get going if you're trying to avoid doing your homework, and then you might think, well, what is it in you that's trying to avoid? Because after all, you took the damn course and you told yourself to sit down. Why don't you listen? Well, because you're a mess. That's basically why. You haven't got control over yourself at all. And no more than I have control over this laptop.
Lobster Boy and people like him will continue to make headway with one snake oil ideology after another, unless some new left can emerge with a better understanding than what he's offering. Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.